Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is Movie Night Tonight. Every single week here, we watch a new film and discuss it in depth, with each month having a new theme. We are currently in the month of January, which is our month of boxing films, and the movie we are discussing tonight is 1980's Raging Bull. Once again, I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár. I'm joined by Rob Giachinta. Rob, thanks for being here.
What's going on?
So, we are talking about Martin Scorsese's film Raging Bull tonight. So before we get into our discussion, and it is a spoiler discussion, we are talking about this film as if you watched it with us. Before we get into the discussion, Rob, I want to know, what are your first impressions of Raging Bull, and roughly how many times you've seen the film?
I watched it twice now, twice in like a month and a half. So, and I have to say, I thought it was really good. I liked it a lot. I didn't necessarily know what to expect going into it. I really didn't know a ton about it. I just knew it was a boxing movie. But you come out of it now really talking about the boxing. You're talking about the direction, the black and white aspect to it, and De Niro's performance, which is incredible and probably one of his top tier, one of his best performances. And it's a movie about, again, like we talked with Rocky, humans with flaws. This character, I think, has even more flaws than Rocky does.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting character study, and I highly would recommend it.
Yeah. So I also have seen this film twice, although not in the last month.
Yeah.
I saw it for the first time a couple of years ago, and then last night in preparation for this discussion. I also really enjoy this movie. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. It's a great character study. De Niro is fantastic in it. I think, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we get into our discussion, but I think especially when compared to Rocky, I think there are similarities between the two stories, but also stark differences between the two characters. And I think it kind of, in a very similar vein as Rocky, it has the boxing as a backdrop to more relational human drama. But the way that the movies go about doing those, in Raging Bull, it's completely different in it. Martin Scorsese's direction's fantastic. The boxing scenes themselves, it's probably a shorter amount of boxing screen time than Rocky.
Yeah.
But there's more throughout the entire film, and it's more brutal by far. This is like the harder, edgier...
This is rated R.
Yeah, this is rated R.
Rocky's PG.
Yeah, this is like the harder, edgier, grittier version of Rocky. And I think in that sense, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. So let's get into the discussion. I think it's worth noting, which I didn't realize until I was doing a little bit of research into the film. Well, actually, I realized it once I was watching the film last night. And it said who the producers were, and it said produced by Irwin Winkler. And I was like, Irwin Winkler? That name sounds familiar. Was he one of the producers for Rocky? Yeah. And I looked back, and he was. And so,
excellent producer. He's produced a ton of, directed produced The Departed, and all sorts of Scorsese movies, and a lot of Oscar movies.
Yeah, no, he's a great producer, and so I think it's kind of funny. So he produces. So Rocky comes out in '76. Of course, on last week's episode, we talked all about the different production issues and the struggle to get that movie made. And so in '76, it comes out, and it gets nominated for a whole slew of Oscars, wins Best Picture. And so Winkler must have been he's like, yeah, I can do whatever I want. So he goes and he does Raging Bull. Which actually, the whole concept for doing the movie came from De Niro. Oh, because De Niro, while on set for The Godfather Part 2, he read the book by Jake LaMotta. And so he read it and he was like, wow, this would make for a great movie. And he tried for several years to actually get the film made. But nothing was really working. And then he was able to get the producers on board, which I think was tied with the success of Rocky. And then he really wanted Scorsese to direct the film. But Scorsese wasn't on board. And it wasn't until Scorsese went into the hospital because he had a really bad cocaine overdose. And he was at the edge of his life. Jeez. And De Niro comes in and says, you need to clean yourself up and you need to make this movie about this boxer. And Scorsese said, okay. And Scorsese made it thinking it would be his last film. He had every intention for that to be his final movie when he made it. And now, years later, Scorsese and also people who were around them at the time say that De Niro pretty much single-handedly saved Scorsese's life by getting him up and out and making this film. And so, really kind of, I think it's interesting when you look at the movie in the context of Scorsese being at the end of his line, at the end of his rope, and striking back for this final film in his mind. You can kind of see that seep into the actual story of Jake LaMotta, into the vision of the film, and sort of the themes it tackles.
He definitely left it all on the table. I'd say this is one of my top 5 favorite movies of his. He's definitely at the top of his game in this, and I didn't know any of that until you said that to me. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. But I just think Martin Scorsese's direction for this is fantastic. And I think even from the very simple idea of having it be in black and white, I think they were saying one of the reasons why, one was to differentiate it from Rocky, which had just come out. But also, Scorsese said when he saw early test footage for the film, he really didn't like seeing the amount of blood that they had in the film. He didn't think it worked for a color film, for a color picture, which is kind of ironic because with the amount of blood that's in some of his later films, then that was a more conservative Scorsese. He was like, oh no, we can't have that much blood in a picture movie, and then later go to Goodfellas or The Departed or any of these other movies covered in blood. The whole movie is soaked in blood. But he was like, no, we should do black and white. The movie kind of takes on this persona of Jake LaMotta looking back at his life, and things aren't held back. Jake LaMotta is a piece of shit.
Yeah, he's not a good person.
Not at all.
For the most part.
And I think that's, one, De Niro plays him fantastically.
Yes.
He plays up the character perfectly. But I really like that about this movie, that they don't hold back. Even though it's based upon a book by Jake LaMotta, with Jake LaMotta right there. I don't know if he was necessarily involved in the making of the film.
I'm pretty sure his brother sued them.
Yeah, for a couple $1 million. But for them to just kind of no holding back, go right after it, and really portray Jake LaMotta as really just a terrible human being, I thought they did a fantastic job with that.
I don't even know which version of him was worse, his earlier days or when he was older. I mean, he was pretty scummy the whole way through.
Oh yeah, both of them, him and his brother, everyone, they're
I didn't think
not as bad as Jake, but still pretty terrible.
Joe Pesci, by the way, is very good in this movie, very underrated. He does an excellent job playing his brother. I think he was nominated for supporting actor as well.
Yeah, this movie was up for a bunch of Oscars. So De Niro won Best Lead Actor, which is great, and also won Best Editing.
I can see that too. What's her name? Thelma Shoemaker?
Is it Schumacher?
Schumacher.
I'm not positive, but she's one of his longest collaborators.
I think she's worked on every single movie of his.
Yeah,
she did The Irishman.
This was the first film that she worked on with Scorsese.
Oh wow!
So this was their first collaboration. It was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Sound. So it was nominated for a whole slew of Oscars. One Best Lead Actor, one Best Editing, both of which were richly deserved. Like we said, De Niro's was fantastic. And his weight gain by the end of the film, we can jump into that. It's the first. All right, so the first time I watched the movie, when it was the very beginning where he has all the weight.
What you're gonna say?
Yeah, I thought it was prosthetics.
I didn't know who it was.
I guessed it was him, but I thought that
he didn't have prosthetics for his nose.
Maybe they did for his nose throughout the whole way.
His nose doesn't look like that in real life.
Yeah, so prosthetics. Yeah. But I thought it was like a fat suit, and I thought he had prosthetics on and makeup and stuff. And then we get into the movie, and once we actually get to the point in the story where that's what he looks like, he starts having all his shirtless scenes and everything. And you realize very quickly, oh no, that De Niro gained all that weight. They shot the film and then shut down production for several months for him to be able to gain all the weight. And at the time... So De Niro gained 60 pounds to play the role. And at the time, that was a record for the most amount of weight gained to play a film. Later, for Full Metal Jacket, Vincent D'Onofrio broke it by gaining 70 pounds.
Is that still the record, or?
To be honest, I don't know. I think it might be, but also, I mean, Christian Bale might have broken it.
Remember there was an HQ question, and it was which actor had gained the most weight, and it was like Christian Bale in American Hustle, and then there was Matt Damon, The Informant, and then Matthew, that gold one, and it was right. So I don't know what the weight was on that, but that was a pretty significant one too. Yeah, but I'd be interested to look that up. 70 pounds, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I'm sure Christian Bale is maybe the most lost.
Yeah, for The Machinist, probably. Christian Bale got down to 110 pounds for that movie.
You know what they say, you want to get nominated for an Oscar, almost kill yourself.
Literally. But no, it just I love that De Niro went for it and actually gained weight, because I know the producers really wanted him to. They were scared that that could gaining weight 60 pounds like that and just mass eating in several months. It's very unhealthy for bodies to go through that drastic weight changes in very short amount of time. And I know the producers really were wanting him to use. They wanted him to use makeup. They wanted to use
I'd be too scared to do it. I feel like if I gained that, I wouldn't be able to lose it.
Yeah. I mean, probably they have professional trainers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if I was an actor, maybe.
Yeah.
I know.
Just for fun, shits and giggles, I'm gonna gain 60 pounds.
Kumail Nanjiani, freaking gets jacked like that.
Yeah. But they both De Niro being a method actor, and Scorsese thought they wouldn't be able to pull off having him in a fat suit or having makeup and stuff. That the movie felt too authentic for them to get away with that. And I completely agree. I think it was the right choice for him to actually gain the weight. Because, our eyes as viewers, I was looking for it. I was like, all right, where's the fat suit? All right, where's the lining of the extra padding that they put on his face? And then when you have the moments where you can tell, oh wait, no, that's full-grown De Niro. Full-grown De Niro. But no, De Niro is just so good in this movie. De Niro is really good. He maybe out of a very small pool of actors.
Probably a top 5 all time. Yeah, I think. Pacino, Day-Lewis.
He is one of the best at playing an asshole.
Oh yeah.
He is great at playing the asshole. And in this movie, our introduction. So we have the whole opening scene of the boxing match going on, which I think is great. I love, so the whole place just erupts into a giant fight, and then I love that one shot of the woman playing the piano, and you see the fight going on, and the whole, there is a lot of great cinematography. There are some absolutely gorgeous shots
too. I mean,
we don't know the other nominees, but yeah, no, the cinematography was fantastic in this movie, and especially because when you're approaching shooting a film in black and white, you have to shoot it in a certain way. The lighting has to be completely different. The cameras have to be completely different. It's a whole nother animal shooting something in black and white than it is in color. And so, for it to be pulled off as well as it was, I thought it was fantastic. But one of our first introductions to Jake LaMotta as a character is a scene where he and his wife at the time, in the very beginning of the movie, are screaming and yelling at each other. He's slapping her. He's being a control freak over where she can go, what she can do, and it's not a pleasant introduction to his character. And I think one of the really interesting things, when we were talking about Rocky, we were talking about how throughout the whole film you're rooting for Rocky. Yeah. You're rooting for him because you like him as a guy, and life just kind of has him down. He's always been sort of unfortunate, sort of been unlucky. And even though he doesn't win the match at the end, you're rooting for him the whole time, and you're behind him. Fast forward to Raging Bull. Now we have a lead character who's a complete dick, who you're not really rooting for. No. You're not rooting for him to succeed. You're not rooting for him to get ahead in life. You're hoping that he gets his comeuppance. And so I think it's kind of interesting. I'm curious to get your perspective on this. how does our perception of the film as a whole change with something like Rocky, where you're rooting for the main character, and something like Raging Bull, where, and this is true of a lot of Scorsese films, where the lead character is not a good person? How does our perception of the two movies change as we kind of flow between the two?
Well, I think it leads to which one is more watchable in a sense. Like, Rocky, I feel like you could watch, like I said last week, like, it's a movie that anybody could watch. You can watch it any time. This one, I'd say this is pretty much for older adults or teenagers watch this, and it's a very dark and depressing kind of movie. Like, it's again, it's not something you watch every day. I happen to watch it twice in 1 month just because of the show, but it kind of puts you in a different mindset where the whole movie you're kind of just hoping that he can turn his life around and be a better person, but we find that never happens.
Yeah.
So it's definitely one that's tough to watch, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think that's a staplehood of Scorsese films.
Yeah.
That the main character, like you look at Taxi Driver, you look at Goodfellas, you look at any of his movies, the lead character is never really a good person. And it's always interesting to have a movie where the lead character is not someone you're actively rooting for, a character that you're not really standing behind, because your approach to watching the movie changes. I think in a lot of films, people who are watching the movies like to put themselves in the place of the main character. They like to watch it from the perspective of the main character. In, say, Rocky, like we were just talking about, you're rooting for Rocky the whole time. You want him to succeed. And part of the thrill of that movie is being able to cheer Rocky on. But with some of these movies, like a Raging Bull, like a Taxi Driver, like a Goodfellas, you're not watching it really from putting yourself in the place of the main characters. You're almost an outside observer watching the movie as a character study. You're sort of, there's an extra layer, an extra barrier separating you, the audience, from the movie, from the characters, and it's almost like there's like this glass window that you're sort of looking into these characters' lives and observing them and seeing what do they do. Whereas with something more like a Rocky, you're trying to put yourself in the place of the characters and get behind them. It's much more personal. You have a closer connection to the character because you're rooting for them and trying to get behind them. But with Raging Bull, you're observing these characters from a little bit more of a distance. And I think for something like this, where you're dealing with such scummy people with like full out misogynists, and it's very interesting approach to the film.
And it's not like you were saying other Scorsese movies having main characters like this. I feel like in other movies, though, at least they have a bit of a charm factor to them. Like Ray Liotta, I feel like he has a sort of charisma in Goodfellas, and Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say you're rooting for him, but he is, in a sense, somewhat likable. This character is just completely despicable the whole way through.
Yeah.
So it's a movie. It's kind of almost like watching a horror movie in a sense, in which you're like, oh, like don't go in there, don't.
Yeah.
In which you're saying like, why would you do that? Stop doing that. Like it's just like the whole way through.
Yeah, I think we often have a conversation as film fans. People have a conversation specifically about movies that revolve around evil, despicable, terrible people.
We had one this year.
Yeah. Yes. And a lot of people have the belief or understanding that maybe these stories shouldn't be told, or that these characters should not be the focus of a movie. And I can imagine if this movie were being made today, if they announced, hey, Jake LaMotta, the boxer, he's going to have a movie made about him, and it's going to be directed by Martin Scorsese, and, or maybe not that part, but, we're making a movie about Jake LaMotta. I can imagine the people on Twitter would be like, Jake LaMotta he beat his wife, which he did. Yeah. He's a piece of shit person, which he is, and he did this, and he did that. Why are we glorifying him with making a movie about him? And if you're looking at the conception of this film from that point of view, I can understand why people would have those positions. But I think there is a place in cinema in any other art form of telling stories about people we don't like. Because I don't think it's necessarily that any movie that's about any character is immediately or innately or inherently glorifying them or glorifying what they do. I think often a lot of people conflate the issues of movies depicting actions and movies supporting or endorsing those actions. Just because a filmmaker shows somebody doing something doesn't mean that they're saying that's the right thing to do or a good choice to do. They're simply showing or depicting something, a character, making a certain decision that that character would make. And I think there is a place for cinema about despicable, terrible people. Because in a way, it shows us who not to be. It's cautionary tale filmmaking. It's saying, this is some of the worst stuff. And again, Jake LaMotta's not a good person. I'm not trying to say he's like the absolute scum of the earth, terrible, evil people. There's worse people in the world than Jake LaMotta. But he's not a good person, nor did he do good things. And clearly he was abusive towards people he was in relationships with. But some of these films, especially ones that Scorsese makes, serve as cautionary tales to show what we shouldn't be or what we should strive to not be, in the same way that there are movies that come out that are heralded as this is what we should be more towards, like a movie about let's say take Selma, a movie about Martin Luther King Jr., and you watch that movie and you're inspired to be more like the kind of person that Martin Luther King Jr. is. On the flip side, you have something more like a Raging Bull or a Taxi Driver of this is a person you're not supposed to be like. And I think that has its place in cinema. And
also, as audience members, do you just want to see stories about good guys? Or do you want to challenge yourself and see if you can either see the good and bad people or even see maybe you're like that person. Maybe that's kind of like almost like looking into a mirror and saying, you know what, maybe I should be different because I don't want to end up like this, and I could see myself ending up like this if I continue to go the way I'm going to. Like you said, it's a cautionary tale. Like, why do we learn about history and slavery and all that stuff? It's so we learn not to do that stuff again.
Those who don't learn from history tend to repeat it, as the saying goes.
So watch more movies.
Yes. Always watch more movies. But I've never understood people who act as gatekeepers of what movies should be made or not be made. And granted, I can understand when people are saying, when there are stories that could be told, that aren't being told in favor of some other stories that we've seen before, or different voices that have not been given the opportunity to tell their stories, I completely understand that, and I'm all for that. But I don't like this kind of trap that we've fallen into, or some people have fallen into within the world of film, of, well, that person's not a good person, therefore they shouldn't be the subject of a movie.
Then you know what? Then don't go. These people, don't go watch. No one's strapping you down to a chair and forcing you to watch Joker, for example, or this. Don't watch it. Like, I don't know. Like, is it that hard?
No, but I
like,
completely
everybody has
agree.
to be like the voice of justice and a hero. Like, it's a movie. Like,
and it's also an issue when it stems beyond, goes beyond the fact of I don't want to watch it. It's to the point of other people shouldn't watch. Yes, exactly. That's where it bothers me. Now, there are definitely movies that that endorse bad things. All you have to do is look at the movie that started the modern feature film, The Birth of a Nation, which was made, which that movie single-handedly...
Pretty much propaganda.
Yeah, literally, that movie single-handedly revitalized the Ku Klux Klan. Single-handedly. And that's the prime example of a movie that it's not just showcasing bad things as a way for the audience to kind of interpret things or look at things from a certain point of view. It's literally saying, hey, these terrible things, these are good things. It's not as if movies can't be that.
And in this day and age, I don't think we'll ever have a problem with something like that coming out. At least I hope
At least not. Well, maybe not wide.
Yeah.
Wide release.
Yeah, maybe someone's making a film in their freaking mother's basement.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing of wide scale.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was a little bit of a sidetrack, but I think that was a good point to make about the film, because I think with a lot of these kinds of movies, that's something that always kind of comes up. I really like about this movie. This was actually one of the first boxing movies to actually have the camera inside the ring with the characters. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at something like Rocky or a lot of other boxing movies that preceded Raging Bull, the camera was always outside of the ring, looking in from a spectator's point of view. Whereas with Raging Bull, the camera's inside the ring with them. Martin Scorsese described it as he wanted the camera to be a third boxer. And I think for something like Rocky, having it on the outside works really well, because you're wanting to view it almost as as an audience member within the stadium, or whatever it's the terminology is, the ring or the arena, whatever the larger building is that arena. Everyone's in, looking in. Whereas with Raging Bull, the whole movie is with Jake LaMotta. You're following him the whole time. It's a character study, and so to have the camera inside the ring with him, to feel the weight of those punches. Because then you get the close-ups of his face and the anger. Like, specifically, you had the guy who Vicky had referred to, like, oh yeah, he's a pretty face or whatever. And then, and then you cut to his match with the guy, and he's just pummeling his face the whole time. You can't have that effect if the camera's outside of the ring.
I agree. That was a very good technique by them, and it shows why Scorsese is so good at what he does. Yeah. Would you talk, if you want to, what would you say your opinion is on the character of Vicky?
I liked her. First of all, Kathy Moriarty does a fantastic job playing the character. I liked the character. I didn't really see why she would go for Jake LaMotta as a guy. Yeah, but
I mean, he's good looking, makes money.
Didn't they say in the very beginning when he first met her that she was 16?
Yeah, that. How old was he?
He was not 16.
Well, no, I know not in real life, but how old was he in the movie? I think he was only like 18, 19.
No, he was older than that. Oh, all right. Well, he at least had to be old enough to have been married at the time. He was probably my guess.
Back then, when did this take place?
Well, that part took place in the 40s, early 40s.
I think you could get married before 18 back then.
I think he was in his
early to mid-20s. It was a weird relationship.
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah. Well, which speaks to the scummy nature of Jake LaMotta. But yeah, no. So that was weird at first, but then they get together and they're married for a long time, and I liked her as a character. I thought she was very good in the movie. Well, why? What did you?
Oh no, I was just wondering as we were speaking about her.
Yeah.
Like, in some ways, I thought she would sometimes, egg on his character just to prove to him how horrible he was, and just I don't know, even I don't know, I just the way sometimes she would speak to him, I thought she would almost speak down to him, almost to get a rise out of him. Not that she deserved to be beaten, but sometimes I did feel she kind of contributed to his issues in a way and didn't necessarily help him get better. But that was just my opinion.
Yeah, well, I don't think she was necessarily a good person herself either. I mean, I don't think she was as bad of a person as Jake.
She did admit to cheating on him.
A lot.
I mean, and then there's the scene where she's out on the town with those guys, and Joe Pesci sees her. Yeah. And then he doesn't end up saying anything.
I mean, and I think, but Joe Pesci kind of had a point at one point. He was like, "You're driving her away." The amount, the fact that Jake was as controlling as he was, and literally go in here, go do this, get out of here, do
people don't get. Yeah. When you tell people what to do, they just want to do it more. Yeah. The opposite.
Yeah. But no, and I think one of the things that Vicky really did, like you were talking about how kind of egging him on, was exposing Jake's insecurities.
Yes.
And I think we talked about, when we were talking about Rocky, we talked a lot about how Rocky didn't really think of himself as a person who had a lot of intelligence, that he had to really he could only rely on his body and his physicality, and he had trouble expressing himself. And that was one of his biggest flaws as a person, was he had an inability to express what he was thinking and how he was feeling. And I think in a similar vein, Jake LaMotta struggles with major insecurities. He's very insecure, especially when it comes to relationships. Yeah. And I think so the whole movie he's completely insecure. Like, oh, Vicky's looking at this person. Is she cheating on me? She's doing this. Does that mean this? And all these things. Part of it, I think, stems from the fact that he himself cheated on his wife, and so he kind of was like, well, if I cheat on my wife, what's stopping her from cheating on me? Yeah. But he is a man who is completely, incredibly insecure about himself. And in the same way that Rocky tried to kind of hide his flaws through boxing and that violence and thinking that's all he can do, Jake LaMotta does the same thing in that he was like, well, I have to be the tough guy. I have to be the one who's like, you can hit me as much as you can and I'm not going to fall down. I'm the one who's going to just go into your house and just start beating you.
And he also takes out a lot of his insecurities on his wife.
Exactly.
And his brother.
Yeah. So I think those are very interesting, because one of the things we were talking about when I asked you last week, what do you think is sort of a staplehood for a boxing movie? You talked about damaged, broken people trying to... What was it specifically? Damaged, broken people trying to kind of mask that through violence?
Yeah. Excessive violence.
Yeah, and we definitely see that in this movie.
Really?
No. Going off of that last point, though, so one of the things I was mentioning, and this is very closely tied to what we were just talking about, is Rocky kind of putting on airs about having to be this sort of quote-unquote alpha male, or being overly masculine as a way to hide his flaws, and how he didn't think he was that smart. He didn't think he had much use outside of his physicality, that he couldn't express himself, and he tried to mask that with being overly masculine. We definitely see that with Jake LaMotta. How would you say we see that in a different sense with Jake in this movie?
I mean, he needs to, like, even, like, him just leaving his first wife for his new wife, he has to have, like, the new, like, hotter model, in a sense, if you know what I mean. And he just has to be, like we said, he has to be the toughest guy in the ring. And while that's good for him in boxing, I don't think that's good for his overall mental state.
Yeah.
I think it definitely gives him such this ego. Even we see it when he gets older too, how he thinks he's like the cock of the walk or whatever, and really he really isn't, and his club's not doing well, really. He's just giving away drinks, and he's like performing stand-up comedy that's just rude and not really funny, and it just doesn't make him a likable person or someone you would want to be around.
Yeah. And definitely, like, even from that first scene when we first really get a sense of who he is, and he's screaming at the guy for the dog barking, he's like, I'm gonna kill your dog, and like saying all these horrible things. Saying all these things. He's literally at any point that he is given the opportunity, he's like, I have to show that I'm the toughest guy in the room. And even in that same scene, he's saying to Joey, like, punch me, go ahead and hit me. And he's like, hit me harder, come on, hit me harder. He's like,
I know people like that.
He constantly has to prove to everybody, I am the toughest guy in the room. Go ahead, hit me as hard as you can. Oh yeah, you're doing this? Well, I'll do that. Like, constantly doing that. And it's all to mask this deep insecurity that he has. And I think this is a theme, as we were saying last week, we are going to see in the upcoming movies that we have to watch. So going into our final thoughts on the film, Rob, what are your final thoughts of Raging Bull?
This is more, I'd say this is, you can almost call it adult version of Rocky, in a way. It's definitely a dark, depressing film that doesn't really end with much hope. But it does leave you thinking about how we can all strive to not be a character like that, and, you know, to express our feelings not through violence and not through, you know, being rude and harsh to people, but by actually talking and trying to, you know, use our words and not use violence. And I think it's again what you said, a cautionary tale on what can happen to you if you do not express your feelings in the right way, and it's definitely a movie that should go down as one of the pinnacles of cinematic history, I think, and definitely one of the best movies of the 80s and one of the best movies of Scorsese. Yeah. And I don't know if I'm going to score it, I'd give it a 4.4 out of 5.
Nice. Yeah, so Raging Bull, I think it's a great movie. Maybe not my top 3 Scorsese movies, but
I'd
definitely
say top
up there.
5 at least.
Yeah.
I'd have to figure
Granted,
it out.
I haven't seen all of his movies, so I'd have to kind of see a few more of them before I can make any sort of official assessment. But the performances are fantastic, especially De Niro. Again, as we talked at length about, this is a film about a character who we don't like, who we're not supposed to be like or like as a character. We're not supposed to root for him. And the way that the movie goes about showing that person, depicting these events, and getting us to be invested in a movie while not necessarily rooting for the character. I think, similar to Rocky, this is a movie where the boxing is a backdrop to more human drama, more relational drama, and I think because that's the actual focus of the film, I think that's part of what makes it succeed as much as it does. And I think that the stylistic decisions from Scorsese to have the black and white and the way he shoots the boxing scenes, to have the camera in the ring with them, all to have De Niro actually gain all the weight himself, a lot of these stylistic decisions make for a really great, compelling movie. And so if I were to give it a rating, I'd probably give Raging Bull a 4.0 out of 5.
Nice.
So anyways, that's going to do it for our discussion of Raging Bull. Next week, we are discussing our the third out of the 4 boxing movies we're talking about, which will be $1 Million Baby, a movie neither of us have actually seen before.
No, I haven't seen it. I own it, but I haven't
You own it? Haven't seen it? Yeah.
You own it?
I don't own it.
All right. Well, I'll let if you can't find it on a stream, and I'll let you borrow it.
Sounds good to me. But yeah, so this will be interesting for us to both kind of give a take on a movie that we haven't seen before. So that's going to do it for this episode of Movie Night Tonight. Be sure to tune in next Wednesday for when the next episode of Movie Night Tonight drops, when we will be discussing $1 Million Baby. Once again, I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár. I want to thank Rob Giachinta for being here.
Anytime.
Be sure to like, comment, subscribe for more content. Be sure to follow us on all of our various social medias at Movie Paradise 99. The latest episode of Film Thoughts dropped on Monday, where I kind of broke down the 2020 Oscar nominations, so you can go check out that to get my thoughts on all the nominations. And tune in this week, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for another episode of the Movie Paradise Show. We'll have a whole bunch of things to talk about. So until our next live stream or until our next podcast, thanks for listening.